Hello, everyone. Happy Monday morning. Last full trading week before Thanksgiving in the USA. So, how's everyone doing? Key earnings this week. Well, let's see. It's sort of quiet. It's very quiet. Good morning, John. Good morning, Patrick. Good morning, Jacob. Good morning, Anissa. Good morning, Richard. Thank you for being on time. Good morning, McRangers. Good morning to people in the background. I hope everyone had a wonderful weekend. So, and is enjoying some fall weather before we head into winter. What else is going on? So Friday we had a decent sell-off finally, triggering some potential longer term, should say more medium term sell signals potentially. We have to see now the secondary bounce. This week's going to be very key. Hello, Charles. Good morning, Daniel. So this week is going to be very key. Not much going on from economic releases this week. Today we got Goolsby speaking. We got some bill auctions, we got housing market index. Tomorrow, building permits and housing starts. Wednesday, mortgage and crude EIA numbers. Thursday, as always, unemployment numbers and Philly Fed and Kansas City Fed. Manufacturing composite, Philly Fed, regional index. The consumer board leading index. That's sort of going to be interesting. Thursday's a decent day, and then Friday with the S&P Global Manufacturing and Composite, inflation expectations, the final ones for November, and consumer sentiment numbers. But there's Thursdays, Fridays really where you're going. Before that, though, let me just jump over here. Not really today, but tomorrow. We got Walmart, Lowe's before the open. Then, especially Walmart and what they're doing with guidance will be very important with the consumer and any insights into holidays stuff. Tuesday after the close, not much. Wednesday, you got Target, TJ Maxx before the open, but Biggie after the close, NVDA reports coming out today that their new racks of their AI chips are having cooling issues. Racks are having NVIDIA off pre-market. So you also got Palo Alto and Snowflake on Wednesday, and then Thursday sort of quiets down. We've got John Deere is probably the biggest one. Afterwards, you got Intuit, but again, we're closing, and then Friday really nothing. So we don't have much in terms of reporting Monday through financial reports Monday through Wednesday, but we do have more so in terms of earnings, and then the financial information takes over Thursday and Friday when earnings wind down. So that's where that sits. You have NVIDIA again off on overheating potential issues with their new chips. Tesla, I don't know why it's up again, but it bounced off the rotation zone nicely. And I'll show you with the secondary reaction what we need to see in Tesla. Other than that, your other besides NVIDIA, your other mega caps are up slightly. Groups, let me just refresh and see who else jumped in. Good morning, Heinrich. Good morning, Royal Palms. We got consumer cyclical, basic materials, energy, all leading the way up. The only stuff in pullback, utilities, healthcare, and real estate, a little technology, but not big pullbacks. This has dropped substantially, only about 60%, 60-40 for one more rate cut in December. So we'll see. Down, that was dropped big time. Not really much coming out this week besides consumer sentiment at the end of the week and inflation expectations that can drive this. It's really going to be what picks up after Thanksgiving in terms of releases. Fear and greed, finally out of greed, back to neutral. And it could fall more, especially with the stock price, the price strength and the breadth. And if you look here on the breadth, the little breadth chart, which was climbing from midsummer through beginning of October, and if you just charted this out, sort of sloppy head and shoulders and coming back down, but it's coming down to could be into these summer low areas. and really stop the uptrend. So breadth is running down, but there's still, yeah, you have put call options bouncing a little, but I would not say that's really greed mode. And with this sell off, we're still above 37, but below 38. So, good morning, Ted. All right, very key little week for me. By the way, in the S&P, we do have a mini potential double bottom. I am using the conservative targets, so the right-hand side. Okay, it would need a close about 59.15.75 into a bounce into the 4-hour rotation zone. So that's what I'll be watching if that closes about 59.15.75. If not, let's just see, because we're right against that 50 harmonic. That's really why I'm focused on this for a little bounce play. Now, what I need to see, we are at daily cycle bottoms. Weeklies is sort of like mixed, but we haven't even returned to the weekly rotation zone yet. So this would only be a bounce play. Now, for when I talk about secondary reactions, here's what I need. This week, any buy setups have to follow through. You'll notice that this little buy doesn't even get us to 62.5. Why? Because we've closed below the rotation zone. So now I am in neutral mode. On the short-term basis, on the daily basis, I'm in neutral mode. We also, interesting enough, closed below a major support shelf. We closed below it on Friday. Does not mean we can't get back above it, but so far we've tested that area. Look where the double, look at where the top of the double has set up. Okay, you see how I drew this shelf right here? Top of the double. What I'm talking about is, so we've already done some minor technical damage. We have not on the harmonic level. We've pulled back to where the bounce zone is, remember, between the 50 and the 62.5. If we follow through at the downside and close below 58.47.75, then we could be starting to confirm that we're going to transition from this minor pullback more into a more substantial top. If we bounce and don't get above 59.87 and roll over again, I'll be watching for a more substantial top. That's what I'm saying. I'm in neutral mode, which means sort of on the weekly basis, we're still in bull mode. Why? We've not closed below the weekly rotation zone. In the shorter term basis, I'm in neutral mode, which means I can look for both bullish and bearish signals. Like we have a potential bullish signal right now. Not triggered yet, unless you front run it. Okay, but again, that's only a short-term bounce play unless it follows through and closes above 59.87. If we close above 59.87, then I get back to short-term bull mode for at least a retest of the high areas. I hope that makes sense to everyone. Good morning, PMG. Good morning, Jake. So this is, I'm exactly laying out via my trading plan how I structure this kind of stuff to figure out if it's potentially turning into the more significant pullback. Also, remember the big green candle from election morning results with Trump winning. I will say irrational, this is not a critique on Trump, it's the irrational retail buying just of everything. A lot of people are going to be trapped should this roll over again. Even after a bounce, a lot of people will be trapped with short-term purchases. So do keep that in mind also. NASDAQ closing above the 62.5. Interesting enough on Friday. So did not tip the probabilities on the daily basis just yet. Definitely below the rotation zone. Definitely below very key support. Definitely. So this one has some even heavier lifting to do. The key area on the NASDAQ and any buy setups. The NASDAQ, same thing, in neutral mode. So I can look for both buy and sell setups. But the NASDAQ has to get back above about 20,990. 20,990 on any buy setup to follow through. This did some more substantial technical damage in the NASDAQ. Now, the NASDAQ follows through on a daily basis, closes below 2474 before closing above 20,990. Then I'm going to watch for the retest of the low area at the beginning of November and all through the beginning of October. We break that, I'm going to be targeting then the 200 simple area between the 50 and the 62.5 harmonic on the bigger scale. So we could start to see the more moderate pullback. Now, in terms of shorter term, we do have daily cycles potentially at the bottom. And weeklies, we are back to the weekly rotation zone. So that's why I'm still looking for potential buy setups, but favoring on the shorter term buy and sell. They're equal. If you know what, there's no one overweighting the other. Did we have a double setup here? I don't think this pulled back far enough yet. No, it is not technically a double. So what this means to me is if we start trading above this 20,656, I'm going to be watching for an intermediate target of 20,756 and then the upper end of the 4-hour rotation zone on the bounce play. Please let me know if some of this makes sense. You know, I'm trying to explain exactly what I'm looking at. The Dow coming back, little dip below the key support, but no close below it on Friday and trying to hold in there right now. So we have a multi-day pullback cycles at the bottom. So the only thing for me that interests me is if we get above this 43,600, and then I'm watching the other end of the 4-hour rotation zone. Other than that, we don't even have a daily buy set up yet. I'm going to be watching to see if this key support holds. Russell, same thing. The Russell pulling back to key support on Friday and closing still above it. Now it's below the rotation zone, so the Russell's also in neutral mode for me. All right, so the Russell mode on any rally, I'm watching the top of the 4-hour rotation zone about 2350. The rotation zones are between the 8 EMA and the 21 EMA. So it's just the 21 EMA and the 8 EMA. It's where I watch for rotations back up. Once we close below it, so as long as we're above the rotation zone, I'm in bullish mode. So for example, back in the S&P, we're in neutral mode because I closed below it. But on the weekly, we're still in bullish mode. If the weekly closes below the rotation zone, then I'll go to neutral mode on the weekly, and we'll definitely be in bearish mode on the daily. And I'll then be watching for really more significant rollover plays. But it's always the 8 and 21 EMAs. The DAX still caught in a mess. Coming up yet last week to the 50% harmonic. Again, look at all these rejections from the 50% harmonic. Thursday, Friday, Saturday, rotating down, but no substantial breakdown play for me unless we get back below 19,100. The notes, this is getting too extended for a potential double. So that's off the table right now. On any rollover play, I'm still watching for notes to continue to sell off, and yields. We're up again, but yields are trying to roll over. So far, it's a sideways correction. I would not be surprised to see, though, a pullback overall in the bigger picture on the 10-year yields. You know, even a pullback to 4.3 is still just a sideways correction. Not even a pullback correction. So we could ease a little with weekly cycles at the top. Not much coming out. Friday, you got the sentiment and inflation expectations, but not much. So yields could possibly take a break this week from climbing. the 20,990 in the NASDAQ. In the NASDAQ, it's right. So I'm drawing the harmonics from the high on Monday to the low on Friday. That gives me, the key is 20,990 on the upside. Why? Any buy setups have to follow through, because any buy setups this short term, especially as we close below the rotation zone, we could easily bounce between the 50 and 62.5 and roll over again. So for any buy setups, they have to follow through to tip the probabilities in the short term and close above 20,990, which would be a close above the 62.5. Why? Then then my target area shifts to the retest, the 87.5 area to 100, and it could just be, hey, we had a minor sell-off. We've then regained the key 62.5. We close above the 87.5 and start taking momentum to the upside. This was just a short-term top. If we can't, then I'm watching for the next substantial rollover play, because we've already done some minor technical damage. So the secondary bounce, we've had the primary reaction. This secondary bounce is going to be very key over the next few days, especially going in. Remember, we got NVIDIA earnings, which has been driving the market. Dollar index looking like it wants to take a cycles rolling over on the daily and at the top on the weekly. Looking like the dollar wants to take a breather, but my key areas is 106. First is 106, and then we're at roughly about 105.65. Those are my two key support areas. And in the bigger picture, that would still just be a sideways correction, not even a pullback correction. You're welcome, Richard. Okay, well, there you go. Charles, you did good. I'm glad you're coming up with your strategies, applying some of the rules and coming up with your strategies and your key target area, 20,630. So 20,630. You're front running it, and that would be right here in the short term. That would be for a bounce up into the key resistance area, which could very well be on the short-term bounce into the open. Glad to see you are coming up with some good levels and you're applying it and coming up with your strategies. Crude. We still do have a minor. It's getting sloppy, but minor double bottom, not even expecting it to trigger. We did close the lowest below here. You can see we actually closed below the end of October and the end of September lows. I'm really focused now to see if we really chip away and break lower. I'm actually just going to pull this off the tip right now, unless something breaks out in the Middle East. Gold finally getting the bounce. Gold finally getting the bounce, but still going to be watching for the next rollover play in gold. I'm now watching anywhere between about 26.20 to right around 26.60 for any kind of rollover plays. All right, we did close right at the bottom of the rotation zone. Technically, this closed just below it. I mean, it's right there. So it's either minorly bullish to neutral mode, and daily is still in bearish mode. So for gold, we've had the primary reaction. We triggered the head and shoulders, got to the first target, almost to the second target. It was not as reliable because we don't have as well-formed shoulder. But in order for me to get both, besides any bounce plays, gold now has to regain 27.04. I'm just going to remember 2,700 and watch for a close above 27.04. So any bounce plays have to get above 27.04 for me to sustain, get back into bullish mode in the short term. By the way, the yields on the JGBs, look at this. Climbing back into major top territory when we had the intervention before and the yen. Little pullback. So little reversal last week. But this was, we're just back to some key support. But what I'm keying off of now is really watching what happens with the JGBs, because they're expecting more inflation to come in Japan. Euro, going to be watching for at least some sideways to possibly little minor bounce correction, opposite of dollar, dollar being pullback. Spiders, Friday again, closing right above the 50%. Going to be watching for, and right at the bottom of the rotation zone. So on the spiders, it did not shift to neutral mode. Still technically in bullish mode also, closing above or closing right at key support. But for the spiders, if you're just trading those, they have to get above 594 on a closing basis for me to shift back into more aggressive bullish mode. And we do have a gap fill. Keep in mind, between Thursday and Friday, we do have a gap fill that is still between the 50 and the 62.5 harmonic. So could it come up over the next couple of days, fill the gap, and still not close above that 594 area and roll over? Yes. Which then I'd shift back to, hey, we're going to watch for the rollover plays. So that's what I'm watching for today. Today, I'm going to be watching Friday's open on any bullish play in here. And Friday's open comes in at 589.72. We're trading pre-market 586.39. Same thing for the, where's my other, same thing. Let me flip, okay. Right here for the Qs, we closed above the 62.5. So we did not close below it to tip the probabilities. We are below the rotation zone and we're below very key support. On any rally, I'm watching the gap down price to Friday on the Qs. 502.94. The key level that this has to get above is roughly 507.62, which wouldn't even fill the gap to Thursday. So that's the key level between 505 and 507.60 that I'll be watching on any rally for a rollover. Bitcoin, so far a sideways correction. I put up new harmonics on here. Should Bitcoin, again, Bitcoin very overbought, insanely overbought, but so many people are still looking for that 100K in the next minor harmonic from the low in August on the 5th to this pausing area. It takes us to 99,000. So far, it's a sideways correction, letting the rotation zone catch up. If we start getting the pull off, I'll pull back, and this sideways correction turns into a pullback. I'll be watching around 81.4 to 81.7. What else do we have? We have Tesla coming back to the daily rotation zone, gapping up pre-market, but Tesla has to follow through today, or this week, I should say, but especially today with this gap up, because if it does not sustain the gap, we'll get interesting about this 340, what's the exact level? 340.11 on a closing basis. Then the target area would be 352.46 for me. That's a great example of the secondary reaction in Tesla. And then we start getting above there, you still have the 87.5, 375 magnet price. NVIDIA, with the overheating issue, you already pulled back. We're going into earnings, but we already pulled back to the bottom of the daily rotation zone. The weeklies, you can see here, weekly support is coming in about 136. And then your major area for me is about 125 with earnings coming up. And there is still a potential massive double top in play, but really doubt that's going to trigger right now before becoming really invalidated. Not to me, but a lot of people say, I mean, it's valued based on what people think it's worth. I mean, Bitcoin has the only intrinsic it doesn't have any intrinsic value. For example, when people say, well, it's better gold or silver or whatever, and I'm not going to take that argument. Gold has industrial use, silver has industrial use, they have a metal use. Okay? Besides what people value them at, like, hey, I've got a gold watch or something else, there's just a meltdown value of gold that's because gold's used in electronics and other things. Bitcoin, I don't know what the intrinsic inherent value is. It's it's only what people will exchange it for. It's only based off an exchange value. So, if people value it at 100K, then it's valued at 100K. My bigger problem, it's been my bigger problem with all the cryptos, is all the wash trading and all the other stuff that goes on. All the tether, not backed, not backed, supposedly backed, pegged to the dollar. And all the stuff they do behind the scenes. Some of it came out with, Bankman-Fried's trial, but there's still a lot of crap going on. That's my big problem. That's an Achilles heel to crypto. Not saying it can't be traded. It's not. It would not be anything I'd take my net worth and put it in and say, "Hey, I'm banking. Everything's going into crypto, baby." Yep, Spirit Airlines filed for bankruptcy. Yes, it did. So that's where we sit right now. Let's take a look at the open. Getting back onto the open. So I mean, for me, for front running this potential double, it has to get above 59.04, 59.05. Even if this pulls back more, it does not invalidate the double, it just changes the targets. And remember, we didn't yet have a double in the NASDAQ, but if the NASDAQ pulls back below 20,468, it is a potential double. That does not mean you magically buy it because it has to be confirmed to the upside. But that's where that sits. Let's just take a look. I'm curious where the tick was, and then I've got to run into the open, the 5-minute tick. Very neutral opening. Wow. Very flat opening. So nothing, no bias there. So I'm going to be watching to see if this low area, if the double held 58.87 holds. If that holds, and then can find support. Any bounce pattern's got to get above 59.04, 59.05, and that would then be possible front run for the double. So that's what I'm looking at right there. Can you look at NGNet? Sure. Good old Natty Gas. Natty Gas, let's start with the weekly. The weekly, the only thing that gets me bullish again on Natty Gas is if we can sustain something above $3. Other than that, we're against key resistance right now, and your key support is back down at 220, 230 approximately. So it's range trading unless it builds a base up here and breaks above $3. Then I would start to get bullish. It's trying to build more of a base. So I'd be watching for upwards pressure on this, but it has to sustain something above $3 and follow through on a weekly basis with a close above $3. You can see on a weekly basis, we have not been able to sustain any close above $3. ITP, ITB. This technically in neutral mode for me on the weekly. Trying to hold key support, but starting to chip away at it. So, you know, the key kiss it goodbye for me would be below 112. That would be really key on the daily. You'd then lose the daily 200. You'd lose this whole support zone. You say, I drew the support on a weekly, and then you have another support, a minor support level on the daily down here, right around that 200 area. If this loses it, I go into, it's already in potential sell mode on the daily. Okay? The weekly is in neutral mode. So the only thing in ITB that would get me back into short-term bullish mode would be if it got above 123.60 on a closing basis. Other than that, I'd be favoring rollover plays. And then if that 200 loses it, it'd be about 109.50 would be my next target, and then it's really not good for the home builders. It could be setting up a massive topping pattern. So I'd be cautious from the long side with the home builders at this point. Very cautious based off the ITBs. All right, with that, I shall talk to everyone later. Hope everyone has a wonderful, wonderful day. Bye for now.